I just want to, kind of, I'm just going to start it over here. Okay. Hi, Kim. I came today because I'm going to be interviewing some new candidates for an OT position in my department, and I'm interested in some information about how I can ask them the appropriate questions and find out if they're a good match for my department. I'm hoping you can give me some insight on how I can do that most effectively.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
All right. I just prepared some questions for you, so I'm just going to ask you a few questions about the interview process, and then you can hopefully give me some answers that will help me get through this hiring of the new OT. First of all, what questions are appropriate to ask when the client when the employee comes in for an interview?
You're going to really want to choose some questions to get to know them, find out if they're going to fit with your company, if they're going to fit with the other team that you have working with you, and what qualities they really bring to your staff that really make them qualified candidates to be there. Some of the things you're going to want to make sure when they come to an interview is that they were ready for it, that they actually did the research, and that they truly want to be with you and not a company down the street that does the same thing, that they're really interested in being on your team.
Okay. Are there certain questions that I can't ask of them?
There are definitely some legal questions you want to stay away from. Things such as race, their creed, religion, age, sexual orientation, marital preference, children, financial situations, criminal records. Those are some things you're going to want to avoid.
So you can't even ask them if they have a criminal record?
No. However, there are ways to get around some of those questions, and one of the things that you can ask about that is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? That's one of the questions that actually would be allowed. So there's ways to get around not being able to ask some things.
Okay.
The example for age would be, are you over the age of 18? So you at least have that information on them. So if you wanted to find out a little bit more without specifically straight out asking, how old are you, you can ask some of those things.
What if I'm concerned that someone isn't going to be able to put in the time or the commitment to the job if they have little children, or what their commitment is going to be to the position? How
Right.
can I find out about that?
Yeah, you cannot ask if they have children, but you can ask, are you able to work overtime? Would you be able to work weekends or holidays? What kind of percentage time could you possibly travel for the position? Do you
Okay.
see a problem with that? Would that create an issue for you outside of the workplace of not being able to do that? So you're not asking if they have children, but basically if they do have children, they then have to kind of disclose it to you in that sense.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. What about the issue with Americans with Disabilities Act? Can you ask anything about a disability, or?
You cannot ask if they have a disability, but what you can ask is, are they able to perform the job appropriately for the needs that you have for that position?
Okay.
At which time they would maybe have to then tell you, I can't lift so many pounds because of an injury that I have, or I'm not able to type because of something that has happened to me, or vision impaired or something like that with computers.
Okay.
So at that point in time would probably be the time that they would tell you that.
Okay, that makes sense. How do I figure out if they would work well with the rest of my team, and if that they would get along with the rest of the staff?
Sure. One of the best ways to find out if they would fit with your team is ask them more like behavioral type questions, past examples of things that they've done. One of the things that you can ask them is, tell me about a time you've had a conflict with a colleague. How did you resolve that?
Mm-hmm.
Another question is, have you ever worked on a team where the team did not get along coherently? How did you resolve that? How did you work in that team fitting? Another question could be, tell me about a time that if you wouldn't have had the good teamwork collaboration that you had, how would that project have gotten done on time? So there's some questions that you can ask along the lines of seeing how they've handled situations in the past or working with the team. If you have a specific example you'd like to give from something that's currently happening in your staff, you could pull that into it then.
Okay, that's a good idea. What about forming questions to determine if they're a good match? What's the best way to do that?
Sure. As far as interviewing them and finding out if they're a good match, not only are you interviewing them, but they're also going to be interviewing you to see if they're the good match to work for your company. But one of the things that you can do is just ask some of the general things to get to know them, to see if you think they'll fit your culture. You can just ask the simple ones like, tell me about yourself. What's your background? What did you go to school for? What made you decide that program? Just get to know a little bit about them. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? You really want to find that one out. A lot of people will just come in and say, well, I see myself advancing and I'm going to have this job title. Well, if it's not a job title you offer, then it's probably that they're just looking to have a job for now and planning to move on. So you want to make sure they're planning to stick with your company and grow with you.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. Do I need to ask them questions about their resume? If I have their resume and I already have reviewed it, is it necessary to ask them questions about it?
I would definitely ask them questions about their resume. Some of the things you're going to want to know, why they chose your company, why they chose the major they did, what kind of coursework or clinical studies and things like that they've been involved with that will really help them succeed on the job. If they were involved in student activities or organizations, what they actually did in those organizations. It's great to belong, but if you were just a member that showed up for a meeting once a month, you really weren't active. So you want to kind of see how involved they got in those. And were they in ones that pertain to their major in industry, or were they just in, you know, something fun on campus? So you want to see where their passion really lies with that. You want to see if they've done some type of volunteer work, also if that's kind of gone along hand in hand with what they're going into for their industry. And then if they've held a job while they were in school, you want to make sure that they've kind of figured out that whole lifetime management balance thing that they've got to plan for in the future. And what kind of work they've done in the past that would tie in and give them skills that fit the position they're coming in for now. It's another good time to see if there's any kind of job gap times happening, and ask them, you know, I noticed there's a gap of 6 months here where you weren't working. Can you tell me about what was happening in your life during that time? Just to kind of see what happened and if there was a situation that kind of goes a red flag for you.
Right. Well, that's good information. Thank you. Is it beneficial to have them interact with patients in the clinic or other staff members during their interview time?
I would say definitely have them interact with other staff. Patients possibly not because of restrictions and patient confidentiality, but I would definitely have them work with the other staff. A lot of companies now are going to at least a half hour to an hour kind of a co-teaching type situation where they go through a job shadow basically to see how well they like the job, to see if it is a good fit for them as well as if they fit with that team. Some companies actually have team members kind of evaluating the person, showing them some skills, seeing if that person's catching on, if they're actually paying attention and seem interested into what this person's teaching them, and just kind of giving you some more input as to how they think the person's going to fit in too, versus just you saying, I think this person's great, and then having them come on the first day and the rest of the team's like, I can't believe you hired this person. They don't understand it, they're not getting it. So I think it's really good to pull another team on that and see what they think and what their feedback is.
That makes a lot of sense, especially if they'll be the ones working side by side.
Exactly.
Is there anybody that you shouldn't include in the interview, just everyone that they might be working with? What about the front office staff, for instance?
I'd say anybody that they come in contact with on a daily basis. You're definitely going to want to have them talk to other superiors, possibly somebody that would be a higher position than yourself as well, anyone that they would report to, and then coworkers. It's great if they also get along with clerical staff and front office staff, but if they're not having daily conversations with them or having to communicate with them, probably not as critical to have them meet with those people.
Okay. And how do I determine how they will think on their feet? You know, in the clinical setting, oftentimes we have to be able to just quickly come to some kind of solution. So is there a way to determine that?
Again, the really good questions are going to be the behavioral questions, such as describe an instance when you had to think on your feet, when a situation arose and you had to come up with how to solve that situation, you know, that day. Another one could be, tell me about a mistake that you've made in the past and how you resolved that mistake. What did you learn from that mistake?
Okay, all right, that makes sense. How do what are some red flags that I would look for if an employee or an applicant is coming in for an interview, and how can I kind of determine whether or not they're maybe someone that I shouldn't consider? What are some red flags?
I would for sure watch and see if they've come prepared. See if they've actually dressed up for the interview to show that they really cared about coming to the interview. If they were on time or if they were late. If they have excuses if they were late, if they seem believable, or if they're just an excuse because they just ran late and weren't prepared. And then how they answer the questions, if they really did their research or if they're just kind of going by the seat of their pants trying to get through these. You also want to watch the people that are extremely canned on their answers, because then that kind of sends a red flag as well, that they've maybe just really practiced on this and their answers are perfect, but then the day they get to the job, they may be a totally different person. So that's one thing that you really want to watch for is, do they seem legitimate, do they seem real, or do they seem like they're kind of putting on a show for you? An interview really is kind of having to do an acting thing to get the gig, but you also want to make sure that it's something that this is how they actually would be. When they're giving answers to questions that you ask them, is it the same kind of verbiage they used on their resume, or are they talking completely in a different language now, them using big words they maybe had on their resume?
Right.
Watch for eye contact, see how interested they are and how engaged they are in the conversation. If they thank you for the time that you've spent with them, if they've been polite to everyone that they've met that day, those are some flags too, where sometimes students just don't think about that they need to be on their best A game the entire day, not just those 20 minutes to an hour interview time frame.
Right. And are there any particular mistakes that new grads that are coming in as applicants make when they go, when they come in for an interview?
Some of the biggest things that they will do is not remembering to bring extra resumes along, because in case they are meeting other people in a panel interview, they sometimes just bring the one or assume that since you've already asked for the interview, you have my resume. They don't show up prepared, where they don't know the mission or the value statements that you have or things that you're doing. They're not up to date. Sometimes I've heard of other employers saying, they gave the example of, the past CEO that worked for us 10 years ago. Where did they get their information? How long ago did they actually do research on us? Just things like that where they're not prepared, and then not thanking you for your time at the end. A lot of employers say that that's really the main reason somebody gets the job, is they were great all the way through and followed up at the end of it.
Okay. Is it important then, I guess, should I be expecting a thank you letter or a thank you note after the applicant leaves?
Definitely, because if you've got 5 applicants that are all the exact same, but only one of them sends you a thank you note, that's going to be the one that sticks out and probably you remember the most, that they took the time to do that.
Right. Okay. Well, I think this really helps me get ready for the interviews that I have coming up, and I appreciate your time and your expertise as a career services specialist.
Sure,
Thank
you're
you very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.